Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Uh, Welcome to TriStar's webcast today on Creo Illustrate 7 Overview, your digital journey in 2D, 3D, and AR. My name is Bogdan Cudzilo. I am one of the business development managers at TriStar. We'll go today through this exciting topic, and at the end we'll have some time for questions. And if you do have any questions during the webinar, feel free to type them into your questions area. You should see the questions area or chat area in your GoToMeeting toolbar that is on your screen. And let's go. Let's take a look at Creo Illustrate 7, what it is. We'll cover a few things. Before that, I want to mention, for those not familiar with TriStar, if you're joining us for the first time, TriStar has been in business for nearly 25 years. We're experts in CAD, data management, PLM, and product development. We have hundreds of customers that we've successfully delivered various type of projects. We are PTC's elite partner. So Creo Illustrate is a software for technical illustrations that is created by PTC, and we support the software for training, as coaching, implementations, as well as other PLM and special purpose apps to help you be productive in your product development process. We do have some current special offers on licenses. So if you're interested in taking a look at some of these offers, contact your TriStar sales representative, or head over to our website and take a look at some of these offers. They do expire at the end of September, so there are some good deals in there. So let's take a look at Creo Illustrate 7. I have a few sections to go through in this hour. This webinar is going to be recorded, so if you do need to take a look at it at a later point in time, or show some of your colleagues, friends, and so on, you can do so. I'll go through three main areas today. Creo Illustrate 7 is the latest release of the software from PTC. It's primarily used for creating illustrations, both 2D and 3D. So these could be illustrations that go into manuals, whether it's a user manual or a service manual within the organization. It could be used to create illustrations for things like part catalogs, illustrated parts lists. It could be used for things like slip sheets and warranty sheets and change information, and also provide service and maintenance instructions for both technicians in and out of your company. The software itself will also lend itself well for creating animations and work instructions in 3D. So you can definitely do those as 2D printed output or a digital output in a static format, but you can really bring them to life when you do an animation for either the general product or for a work instruction, whether it's assembly, disassembly, maintenance instruction, or even a manufacturing instruction. Lately, the field of augmented reality has expanded, and it's very very productive in the current environment to just kind of digitally see your product or your assembly or disassembly sequences or work instructions in a virtual environment. So we'll take a look at how you could use Creo Illustrate to prepare content, especially those animations, especially those sequences of your products for things like marketing and sales engagements, trade shows, showing the product to a potential customer, or even enabling a much richer experience for your downstream consumers, your customers. We'll also take a look at how Creo Illustrate could be managed in Windchill's PLM, and take a look at the associative nature of when a change needs to happen, how can you update these illustrations really quickly? And then at the end, we'll have some time left over for some questions and answers. I'll get to those. You can type those in at any time when you see something interesting. I'll try to get as many as I can. If not, we can follow those up. Just contact your TriStar sales representative and he'll be able to put you in touch with me, and I can answer those questions. So what is the need for a software like Creo Illustrate? So, typically when users are creating content for, technical publications, manuals, parts lists, and so on, sometimes that illustration process is slow and it's very, very difficult to keep it up to date. When you are going through a product development process and engineering is changing the product frequently, you really can't start that manual. You really can't start those illustrations until the product is pretty much finished, locked down, or else you're just going to be continually making changes to your illustrations, and it's usually a very manual process using other tools and the manual-based tools. Also, there's a lot of rich CAD content in companies. The engineering departments are creating these great 3D CAD models. There's a lot of 3D part catalogs online that have 3D CAD models, a lot of them free, a lot of them you can purchase of common components. And not only the product, but also things like fixtures and tooling and the environment around the product where it's going to be used. There's a lot of nice 3D CAD models, so why can't we use those? Can it be easy to just reuse existing CAD content in a software? And usually, as an illustrator, I may not know CAD. Typically, illustrators or the users who are creating these manuals don't really want to learn CAD. So they really will not use 90% of the functionality of CAD that the engineering department uses. So they need a much easier software, much easier environment to operate in. And that's where Creo Illustrate fits in. Now, because a lot of companies have this 3D CAD content, really engineering is creating that illustration for the technical publication team. They're the owners of that data. They know it best. They know how to use the tools. So they're kind of using them to create the illustrations. But they're really only using 5 to 10% of the CAD software. So I was in the same process creating illustrations when my design was finished. I really wanted an easier tool to use and a much nicer looking tool as well. Engineering is very accurate, very precise in terms of the content that it creates. But I just need to convey it graphically to the end user, not to my manufacturing, not necessarily to my manufacturing department where they need super accuracy. And typically, what we find is that the process is very serial. So I mentioned this before, where you really can't start creating a graphic until the design is pretty much finished. So once the design is done, I can create my graphic. If there's any changes I need to incorporate, I really have to start again. Maybe I can reuse some of the graphics I've done, but there's some drastic changes coming, I have to really start again. So wouldn't it be nice if I could start doing my work as the design is evolving and have it updated really seamlessly if there's any changes coming down? So what can we do with Creo Illustrate? So that's where kind of the value comes in for the end user, where in Creo Illustrate, um, it's a tool used to import 3D CAD data that already exists. And the 3D CAD data can come from the um, the web, a neutral model, from some part catalog. It can come from my company's design tools that they're using. And it's a very graphical based environment, graphical editing environment. So it's fairly simple to use with ribbons and quick shortcuts for creating illustrations. It is CAD heterogeneous. That means it understands the majority of the CAD formats on the market today. So not only can I use Creo from PTC, but I can use other CAD in my illustrations. So I can import some of these other formats as natively as I would with CAD. Creo Illustrate allows me to get those 2D illustrations from that 3D content or keep it in 3D when I need it. It allows me to see the BOM structure that's imported, so I can hide, remove parts I don't need. I can get information about parts and components. I can also create intelligent callouts, parts list tables based on that BOM that comes in. And I can sometimes edit that BOM if I need to. So sometimes I may need to create things like hardware kits or groups of components that need to be called out as a spare part or a part that I want to use in my my ordering process. So those intelligent callouts are tied to the part. So it and you'll see in my demonstration how they work. There's also the ability to put in a library of symbols and graphics that I use in my illustrations. So not only the physical part that I am depicting, but also other labels and symbols, arrows and hands and so on. So fixtures, tooling, consumables. If you have any of those objects, you can import them as 2D labels or 3D actual models, and you can get a lot of these from libraries online as well. The other nice thing with Creo Illustrate is that it creates very high quality illustrations. It emphasizes the parts using thick and thin lines. It gives you different shading options. So when you look at that compared to a very precise engineering drawing, Creo Illustrate is just meant to be that visual method of communicating that product. It also includes the ability to do animations, and you can save these animations either in a format that can expose it in your PLM tool, or you can save it as a movie file. So you can take it and expose it out into MP4, Windows movie format, and share it with others. We'll see how it's also integrated with PLM software and service, service systems within the PTC ecosystem or others. The data management of Creo Illustrate is going to be something that is going to allow you to track the changes to the source content and update your illustrations and actually see what effect those changes have on your illustrations and whether you want to update them or not. It can also publish into multiple formats. So when you're done with your illustration, you can save these out into some of the 2D and 3D vector raster formats. So things like image files, you can save them out to standard vector files like a CGM or SVG. And you can also save it out into other PTC tools like Arbortext IsoDraw. That allows you further 2D editing if you're still delivering a lot of the 2D content. So there's a lot of formats that Illustrate can kind of input and output. So in terms of figures, you can import these out into image files. You can output them into these vector files, common formats, web formats. You can then use those images in other downstream authoring tools like Arbortext Editor. You can have different formats published out of your figures as a automated publish. And if you're connected to Windchill, there is a Illustrate publisher that's now available on the server. So as users are uploading their illustrations, it can start outputting these automatically for them. You can also output things like parts list through a common, Excel format, CSV format. The animations and work instruction sequences, you can also publish them into, single page sheets that are consolidated into an instruction set, or the animations into some of the common digital formats, and so on. So before we get into the other topics, let's take a look at some Creo Illustrate. So here I have Creo Illustrate open, and I can go in here and start opening existing Illustrate files. So let me take a look at some of these files here. I'll open up an illustration that I've been working on. This is an illustration of a paper handling machine. So when I open up this illustration, I can see I have a list of figures. Let's switch into my figure view. And as I go through my figures, this will show me the content that I've been creating. And then I can continue creating this content as I go along. Right? So, this is a live 3D model in my illustration. On the left-hand side here, I have my product tree that shows me the components that I've imported. And I can go in here and start, kind of going through the model. I can unhide components quickly in my illustration. So as I go through this, I can turn things on and off. And this is a live 3D illustration. So it is a 3D model, even though it kind of is in a 2D view. I can position this really easily. So I don't need to rely on engineering to send me views of this model. I can kind of position it to the way that I need to position it. Now this inset view has been set a certain way, so I'll keep it in that view, and I'll just position my illustration this way. Now I can go in here and modify any of these further on. I can also start creating some new figures out of this illustration. And Creo Illustrate really optimizes the CAD content, so you can bring in really large assemblies into your environment. You can bring in multiple large assemblies into your environment, and they'll optimize it for the illustration process. It will shrink it down and only give you the graphical details that it needs. There's some settings that let you strip out a few things you may where you don't need a very powerful workstation to do these type of illustrations as you would for a CAD software, for example. So let me open up another one. In this case, I have another illustration that has another component in here. So I've been creating some of these illustrations, and they open up fairly quickly. This is a optimized 2D view of my bike here, and it has a lot of components in here. I have a nice zoomed in view here that I'm looking at as well. Now in this case, I only have one figure. So let me start creating something in Illustrate. I'll kind of continue creating some things. So I'll create a brand new figure. This is going to show me my source content. I can preview what this looks like. So it's my bike assembly. Let's create a new figure from that. So here's my new figure view. Let's put it into an orientation that looks maybe something like this. And then I'll kind of continue doing this. So I can go in here and just right click, switch different view types. So this is my hidden line removal mode that kind of optimizes it for 2D output. I might have some other shading modes. So there's a white shaded mode. There's some flat shading. There's other types. And I can go in here and control how this looks like. So maybe this is going to be let's put this back into the shaded mode. So maybe this is going to be my 2D illustration that I can do from here. And in the figure, I can change this to a perspective. So if it's a larger product, and kind of show it in a more realistic view. I can go in here and change also the light scenes. So the lights appear a bit differently depending how this part works. I can go in here and for a single part, I can control its transparency settings. So if I want to emphasize maybe something in this motorcycle, let's drag a lot of these components. I'll put these into a phantom perspective. I really don't want to illustrate them. I really just want to illustrate that front tire mechanism. So I'll just select a few of these components, and I'm just using the common tools like Control and Alt Shift for selecting multiple items. So here I'm kind of illustrating. I just want to make sure that I call out this front tire. I can also go in here and change colors. I can set up my own color palette, but if I want to change some colors of these parts, I can. So whatever source color it is, I can do my own. I can also put in things like an inset. So I have a couple, and you can create your own library of these with different styles. In my case, I'm just going to create a round inset. I want to zoom in really into this area using an inset. So I'm just going to position it right in that area because I do want to call out some of these parts. I'm going to make this part a little bit brighter so I can kind of see some details. Maybe for illustration purposes, I'll give it some color in there. And then I want to call out some of these parts. So using callouts, I can also kind of do item numbers if this is going to be a parts list. So as I kind of drag my mouse around, I can start creating these type of callouts and really just emphasize the parts that I'm interested in that inset view. So in my inset view, I can control settings. I can control what my render mode is within that inset view. So I can change it to different settings. In my case, I just want to emphasize these parts to be in that type of view. So this is my new figure. I just captured that, so I can continue moving on and making other figures. The parts list or the item list is being built right at the bottom here as I'm working through creating these callouts or placing these callouts. So I can see how many of these I'm calling out and what those part numbers could be that are coming from CAD. And I can edit these part numbers as well. So I can rename the part If this is another option, like a -1 option, I want to call out in my tree here. So once the design is finalized, I can kind of create illustrations for different options if I need to, if I don't have CAD content for it. So this is my illustration so far. Let's save this illustration and continue with some other illustrations as well. So let me open up an illustration. In this case, I'm going to go into my PLM system, and I'm going to browse to some content I have in there. I'm going to log into my Windchill system, and I do have some content in the PLM system. And I do have this this other assembly that I'm going to be using to create additional illustrations. Now, because I'm working on this, it prompts me, do you want to check it out? Or do I want to just open as read only? Sure, because I'm editing this, I will check it out. I will take ownership of this and open up that illustration. So for the end user, it's really seamless. I really don't need to understand the PLM system. I just know that it's there. I can look at content within the folder that I have access to. Here it's also telling me that since the last time I've been editing this file, the source content has changed. So someone's been updating my CAD assembly that I'm using in my illustrations, and I have the option here to update to the latest release, to the latest revision, to the latest version. For now, I'm going to say cancel. I don't want to update it. I want to continue working on what I currently have. So let me take a look at some of the figures that I've been working on. So it's a small fan assembly, and I'm going to go in here and continue working on it. So then, I kind of place this from CAD. I have a series of figures that I've been creating in here. One of these is also a animation figure, so I can go back and play back and see how that looks. Now, this was actually a mechanism designed in my Creo mechanism extension. So this allows me to set up real kinematic motion of how the product would behave. And I reused that mechanism motion that's been in my CAD model in my Creo Illustrate sequence, right? So engineering has kind of defined how the product should operate, and I'm just going to use the same exact information they've defined. Put a lot of good logic in there to make it rotate and spin the way the real product would, and I'm just going to reuse it in my illustration to convey that information to the end user or to the consumer. Of course, the last view I have is the exploded view that kind of shows me some of these parts and a bill of material that shows me different information that I might want to put on a parts list. So so what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to recreate this illustration from scratch. I'll show you how easy it is to create all these different figures from scratch. So I'm going to create a brand new illustration. So in this case, I'm going to link my CAD content that's in my Windchill system. So I'm going to go in my Windchill system, because that's where my content resides, into one of my products. I am going to go into one folder that has the illustration sources, and I want to get the CAD assembly that is the part number, or the name of that assembly. I don't have part numbers, I just use names in my demo. So I'm going to get this fan complete assembly. I'm going to open that up and get that assembly into my session. So when I open the CAD, I can kind of see, well, engineering's been doing some updates because they've added a base component that I didn't have in my previous illustration, which is fine. I'll use that one. And this is my kind of nice little desk fan that I'm using these days because it's really hot outside. So I'm going to just create a figure using that illustration. Right, so here is my my first figure. Let's kind of go in and start creating some content. So if I look at my figures, there's only one. I'll use the current view, snapshot its location. I can always get back to it. Let's change some render modes. The first one was a cell illustration. So that one gives me the cell illustration. This fan is a bit dark, so let me change some colors. I'll make it a little bit, grayer on that screen. Maybe I'll change the lighting a little bit, brighten it up a bit, using this cell illustration. So there we go. So I got my first figure. Let's duplicate that figure and create figure 2. So I'll just name this figure 2. Now I can name these figures anything I want, so I don't have to keep figure 1, 2, 3. I can name it something else later on if I do that. Now I want to make the second figure here. Let's see the list of figures, figure 1 and 2. I want to make the second figure an animation. So one of the things I can do is I have my animation panel here, and I can do sequences, which will allow me to do a sequence set typically used for work instructions, or I can switch it to just a general animation and just animate how the product would look like. So in this animation, I can start doing keyframe types of animations. I can also import a mechanism that engineering has created. So out of mechanisms, I can export a frames file. So engineering has exported a frames file for me. And I can get this out of Windchill as well. I'll show you later how that works. But I have this oscillation mechanism animation that now comes into my timeline at the bottom here. And if I move my product, I'll set up its view, kind of show it something. Let's change my spin center to somewhere where my mouse is. And I'll do something like this. Let's play it. So my mechanism animation comes in. It's however was defined out of the CAD software, and it defines the paths and so on. So once my mechanism animation plays, I'm going to start animating it further. So I'm going to capture the view starting from here. And I'm just going to grab a component and just start dragging it using my translation. So I want to see how this thing is taken apart. Now, I don't have any screws or bolts just to keep this easy. They probably would be in there. So this animation here, I'm actually going to put it into a different render mode just to brighten it up a little bit so I can see the internals. Okay, continue. So let's keep exploding out these components and see what's in that fan. Right? So I can just keep dragging these any kind of direction. I can also do precise dragging. You can see that right at the bottom here, I have my unit system in millimeters. I can change it, but that's what the model has been designed in. And I can go a precise drag of, let's say, 160. I can also drag a box around the other components and kind of move it in a certain direction. Now my direction here is going to be based on the parts, so I can change it to a different axis if I want to move it later on. But I'm just going to take off this cover and kind of move the base down. And this is my illustration so far. I want to call out some of these parts. So I'm going to do some of these call outs. But in my case, I'm going to do call outs that are based on not only just the index number, but the data within the file. So I can use part numbers, or I can configure these callouts. If I go into my callout styles, I can configure this item tag to not show the part information, but I want to insert an attribute that shows me the description parameter out of my CAD or Windchill system. I can show it using revision or version or other attributes that you have on that file. So I'm going to show the value of that description of that part. And I can, you can do multiple values in here, times, quantities, and so on. But in this case, I'm going to edit my call out. So now I'm showing the actual name of the part. That was the description. That is really easy for the end user. So I'm just going to kind of create some of these. And that's going to be my, this one I didn't enter a description value, so that's okay. There is no attribute found. So if that doesn't exist, I'm just going to do a general note and enter it myself. Sometimes data could be missing, so I'll call it fan base. And I want to make sure that this matches with the others by being a rounded rectangle. I'm going to grab all of these things and edit their properties so they're a bit bigger, and I can edit these as standard styles for my illustrations. I'm actually going to turn off the border, so it's just the names on my illustration. I can also go in and put in some nice effects. So for example, on this callout, the leader can have a halo around it. So let me do a thick halo. You can see, you know, as I kind of zoom into the fan base here, you can see that nice little kind of white area around the product that kind of shows me if everything is really hard to see. I can use some of these nice effects to convey more of that information. One thing I do want to show also is this kind of area is hard to see, so I'll use my favorite insets. Maybe I'll use this square inset. I'll just highlight the area for my inset. Maybe I'll move my inset somewhere down here. I moved a little bit too far out, so let me move that box right in here. Just make it a little bit bigger so it covers the part. And here's my nice style that allows me to call out more parts in here. Now this one is a little bit too small, so I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Maybe I'll put it down here in my illustration, and then again start calling out more parts. So in this inset, it didn't have enough room, so I'm just going to call out some of these in here. I may also want to explode this out because there's some parts in here that I don't see. But for now, this looks good. I'm just going to grab these callouts, change their styles again, and change the color to match the other balloons. I'll also put some nice halos around it. And this is my new figure that I created. Now, I don't know how this is going to play, but this is not only a static figure, but it's an animation. Let me play back that animation. Everything I've done to kind of show someone what these products are. So as this is playing, every kind of movement I've done, I told the system to capture it. And I'm calling out these parts that I put these things, these call outs on. There's my view, and I can kind of move text. I can have text appear. I can do general text as well, and so on. So that was a big animation. That animation is in my timeline right down here, so I can go back and edit it. It's a keyframe animation, so I can drag and move around how fast things move, which things I don't want to include in the animation, so I can go back and edit this. You know, if I have a nice large screen, I can put in a lot of this detail, just like you know, if you had a nice screen for editing large tables. But in my case, this is my second figure. I can keep going and start creating other figures. So let's do new figure. Now this figure here, I'm going to do a 2D figure because I want to include this in my printed content. So I'm going to create first a 3D content of this, and I'm going to put this in a hidden line mode, so it's a nice 2D representation. I'm also going to put some of these parts into a phantom state because I want to see really just the placeholder, but I want to see components inside of that mechanism. So this is my 2D view. I can do an exploded one as well, but I'm going to start off with this 3D figure. and I'm going to create a new figure, but this is going to be using the current figure, but I'm going to do a 2D view instead. Right, so this is going to be another figure, but this is going to be in a 2D format. So this is a vector format that's been snapshotted off of figure 3. If I go into my tree here of figures, I can see figure 3 was the 3D content. My 2D content is just a vector. So now I can go in here in my 2D vector content and start trimming or changing lines or deleting things. So if I press delete on my keyboard here, I can start deleting some extra lines, cleaning up stuff I may not need on this illustration. So if you're still doing kind of the 2D editing, I can go in here and do some trimming. So like, for example, this part I don't need. I can kind of start trimming to the geometry, right? That part I don't need. It's actually a line and so on. So if I need to do a little bit of a cleanup here because of some of these things, or I may want to draw some and I want to draw some Bezier lines to kind of show what that cable looks like. I could do that. So I can kind of, I'm not the best at this, but I know there are others that are super good at this. Kind of a fat, thick cable, but I can kind of add some additional things in here. You can also import additional formats, so I can embed additional formats out of my system. So I can import, things like formats from DXF or DWG files. If they're in a vector format, I can import other CAD drawings potentially. And if they're in that type of format, like a DXF or something, I can reuse their vectors on my illustration and combine it together with my fan. You can import images as well. So that allows me to kind of do that 2D figure, and there's a lot of settings I can control on the figure itself. Now, if that doesn't give me enough detail, I can control how these lines are created from the 3D figure. But the nice thing is that if I go back into the 3D figure and I make a decision that, well, really this fan should be exploded because it's really overlapping my geometry. I just want to maybe explode it out that way. Maybe put an explode line from here back into my model here, and this is the default. I'll fix the orientation based on the axes. Maybe I'll do a parts coordinate system and change the exploding endpoints somewhere close. And this part is in phantom, so I'm going to move it back into non-phantom mode, just so I can hide that kind of explode line. So let's say I make that type of update. Now in my 2D figure, when I switch back to it, it updates itself, but it doesn't lose the information that I've been editing here. So kind of updated by adding this additional information. And I might want to, kind of shrink this down, scale it, maybe everything down, so it's not so big on the screen, so it fits on my paper. So in my case, I don't think I took everything properly. That's okay. I'll recreate it. in that case. So I have my 3D view and my 2D view here that that I can keep working on. When I'm done, I can save this view or publish this view into multiple formats. So I have multiple formats for 2D figures, for 3D figures. I can predefine these published formats. So for example, for a 2D figure, I'm going to export these out into CGM files. For a 3D figure, maybe I'll export them out into movie files and so on. And I can continue kind of creating these figures in my illustrations. There's also a symbol library, so I might want to go in here and put in some symbols on the parts. I can also put in decals on the surfaces of these parts. I can create a library of common tools. So if I need to define some of these tools in my environment, I can do that. And let me do it precise 90-degree rotation. There's a 3D tool that I've added to my service instructions, or a decal, or just a label on the screen. So when I export this out into an image or 2D file, I can see this information. Okay. So that was creating 2D and 3D figures from scratch in Creo Illustrate. The other use case for Creo Illustrate is using the software as a component to create my augmented reality. So for example, typically instructions are done in a 2D printed format or a PDF or something. Would it be nice if I could use augmented reality to create my instructions or show a digital version of the product overlaid on the original version, or just a digital version in space? In this case, in this machine, I'm going to be using Creo Illustrate to define the animations to disassemble a serviceable product. And you'll see this is using Vuforia View on a tablet or phone, and the technician can go in and play back the instructions that have been created with Creo Illustrate. So when they highlight a component to service, you can see the 3D models that have been created inside of Illustrate. So these animations are played back from those that were created in Creo Illustrate. And Creo Illustrate is a really nice tool to easily create these animations, and then you could reuse them in the AR environment. So you can show your product in service. You can also create some content for prototypes for new products that you haven't manufactured yet, just to show someone at a trade show, or show marketing content along with that 3D product. You can use it in service to convey information to service technicians and create work instructions using Creo Illustrate. Much easier than other tools that are specifically designed for engineering. So, Creo Illustrate is a component in being able to use augmented reality using Vuforia, authoring that content. You can use CAD content, you can combine media together, and Creo Illustrate is one component in Vuforia to be able to create those type of animations. So that fan that was spinning, I can reuse that in a Vuforia environment, and my animation's kind of complete, and I can show it to somebody really quickly. Now, in terms of managing data in PLM, how does that look like? So I want to spend the last few minutes here taking a look at how the data management component fits into managing Creo Illustrate. So in Windchill, you typically will be putting in CAD models, and you will use those in Creo Illustrate with a couple of prerequisites, which are fairly easy to set up. So first, to be able to use Creo Illustrate, you need a functioning visualization. So when the CAD department puts in their 3D CAD models, your visualization server will typically generate these lightweight representations in Windchill. So you may be doing that today. Then there are some post-publishing rules configured to create or extract those those visualization files to be used by Illustrate. Illustrate doesn't use the native CAD models because it just doesn't need to have all that data. It needs the accurate geometric information and attribute information, but not how the part's been designed. So you don't need all that IP that engineering creates. You just need the downstream product. But in Windchill, that publication graphic is linked to the source CAD content. So if the CAD designer changes that CAD model, that publication graphic will auto update using that visualization service. So assemblies, parts can have that publication graphic, and it's its own object in Windchill, so you can include it in your change management system by flagging it for modification. You can examine the links and the impact of changes to those publication graphics. Which version of the assembly am I using in my illustrations? And have they recently been modified that I need to update my illustrations with? The publication graphic itself is the actual Creo Illustrate file. And again, Creo Illustrate can be checked into Windchill. Like you've seen me opening the models from Windchill, I can definitely check those in. And the illustrations that you create are also published as these viewables inside of Windchill. So you can control even the downstream deliverables, the animations, the figures. You can use them for manufacturing work instructions. You can use them to to conduct design reviews and all within Windchill. So those are typically the Creo Illustrate components right within Windchill. So let me kind of quickly go into my Windchill environment and show you what that looks like. So here I have my Windchill system open. Let me zoom in this a little bit more. I have a folder here inside of Windchill that has the source CAD data, and here I have that illustration file that I've uploaded into Windchill. And in my case, let's take a look at that illustration file in more detail. So when I go into my related objects area, and I go down into my source content for this illustration, I can see that there is a publication graphic coming from the assembly. And what I'm looking at right now, this version of the illustration is out of date. So the latest version here, it shows me of the source data is A.2, and I'm only synchronized to the A.1. So it's out of date. I probably would have gotten an email saying that there's been a change or a change task in my change system that would prompt me to update this. So if I go back into my Creo Illustrate, let's do a bit of updating. So let me find my Creo Illustrate here. There we go. So let's open up that file. I don't want to save this new one. Let's open up that fan illustration file from Windchill. It's available to be checked out. Let's check it out because I do want to update it. So it's going to load the illustration file for me. Now it's telling me that there's a newer version available. Let me cancel that for now and kind of examine the newer version. So this is my original content. It's the illustration without the base. Let me update it. So if I go into my illustration, look at some information about my source. Here I can see that there's one file that's been linked to this illustration, and there's an update icon that shows me that it may be out of date. So get back to this. So there's an update action I can perform. There's 14 parts that are part of that update. So let's update that action. So let's save that file. We'll reload it with the new changes out of the Windchill system. So the nice thing here is that my figures here, there's some new parts. So there's a my blades have changed, they're different size. If I go into my structure here, there's a if I take a look at my part, there's a new part. So the blue parts are the ones that are already in my illustration. There's a new fan base support. That's a brand new component. Let's add that to my structure. So if I go into my figures, let's turn on that new base. Turn on that new base in this figure, and maybe I will put this base into a phantom as well. Maybe clean up my illustration a little bit, but everything else is still there. Everything's been predefined. The blade sizes have changed a little bit, so I really don't have to do with anything that at the part level. Everything changes. Let's go into some of these other figures. Maybe in my animation, I want to turn on that new part. Now I can see here that, well, there's a little bit of interference now between that part. So I haven't been a good designer in creating that base because I did this myself. I didn't check for that interference through its range of motion. But again, my animation is still there, even though the part is new. My blades are kind of larger now, so they do interfere with the base, so I need to do something with that. And again, in my parts list, I can turn on that new part. And because it's in this original location, I'm just going to move it down a bit so it's in the next view. I'll create a new callout for it. That becomes number 13, and it gets added to my list. So now I have my illustration updated. I've added a new part, everything else updated for me. Let's save the current illustration. And in my Windchill toolbar, I also have the ability to do a check-in. So when I'm done editing this, it just checks the model back into Windchill, and everyone else can look at it. When it's checking it in, I can examine the background operation. If it's a large, heavy model, it'll show me the progress of what it's doing. I can continue working on the illustration while it's checking it in, so I'm not forced to wait. And I can kind of continue working on it if I'm making some additional new changes. But that background operation is completing for me. A lot of windows open here. So back in the Windchill system, when I go into that folder again, now I can see the illustration is at 8.2, it's the second iteration, and I can see that the source is synchronized to the A.2 version. It's no longer out of date. So when I look at this information, it's all integrated in my system. Okay, so that will conclude my topic on Creo Illustrate. Again, this recording will be made available in our recording area, and I'll just take a few questions over the next few minutes. Thanks for sticking around, and I'll get to them as many as I can. So has that model been imported from Creo? So most of these, yes, they have been imported from Creo. There was a few in my system that I've used from other CAD, but the majority of them, yes, were from Creo. Now, if you're importing from other CAD tools that you're not using PLM, then it's just simply file import, either embed or link to that CAD content. And if it's somewhere on your drive, you can import the common CAD formats as you need to. So if you want to take a look, so the other question was, what are the major improvements in this release? So there's a what's new document on the PTC reference section. So if you've been using Creo Illustrate 6.1 and you want to see the new options in 7, head over to the PTC eSupport site and you can take a look at the updates that occurred from 6.1 to 7. The main upgrades were just the way it handles decals and the way it handles the save and check-in process. Those were the main updates. Unfortunately, I don't have time to demonstrate today searching inside of Windchill for these things. I can definitely do that if you want to see that information. Contact your sales representative, and we'll be happy to show you more in Windchill and how that stuff works. And if you want to see more Windchill related content in the webinars, let us know. We'd be happy to do some in the future for you that dig deeper into that. So the output, so the question was, how do you use the output from Illustrate into Vuforia View? So you need Vuforia Studio to generate AR content for Vuforia View. Vuforia View is just a viewer on your tablet or phone. But once you create that content, the output out of Illustrate is a Creo View file. It's a PVZ extension. And in there, it includes all of the figures that you figure will be its own item, and then you could use those in your Vuforia objects, model items, and so on. So the other question was, is the publishing of Creo Illustrate stored within Windchill, and is it using the Windchill visualization CAD workers? Yes, so the recent releases of Illustrate, in the past, the publishing of that viewable was done by the client. So when I checked in my illustration using Illustrate, Illustrate would publish the PVZ files essentially into Windchill, and they would go wherever they need to go. You can now set up a CAD worker that uses Creo Illustrate. So the worker itself would publish those figures or those illustrations out of Illustrate without using the client. So it's really nice if you have a lot of people checking things into Windchill and distributing information, especially for things like manufacturing planning and the manufacturing modules in Windchill. The other question was about the attributes. So can you control the attributes that are shown in the file. So yes, so whenever you import a file, a CAD model, it may have those attributes in there. If you use Creo, it will have the attributes in there. If you use other CAD software from other CAD vendors and you go through Windchill or through some of the CAD adapters, you will also get attributes out of those CAD systems. So if you put properties on your files, things like iProperties, attributes onto your other CAD models from other CAD vendors that PTC can translate, you'll be able to see attributes as well. And the admin can set up for the users or for themselves Creo Illustrate templates that have those callouts. So I had that one called model item that I edited. You can have different versions of that model item that show different attributes in that callout. So you can predefine those and store those in a Creo Illustrate library, and definitely just quickly you reuse those without always having to edit them. So it's a really nice thing. I always put in things like descriptions, part numbers, for attributes. Just a few more other comments. I'll answer one more question. Maybe I'll take a couple. So the 3D connection mouse should work with Illustrate. There is a checkbox in the Illustrate settings. It may not be on by default, but there's a checkbox right now that allows you to set Illustrate to work with 3D mice. So it's in the Illustrate settings. I've seen it there. If it doesn't work, I'm not sure whether it's the driver of that or what version it is. You'd probably best to contact PTC support on Illustrate and their compatibility with that specific 3D mouse version. That's what I would recommend. So how do you, do you need WT parts in Windchill? No, you don't. You could have them, but you don't need them. You can just have CAD in there. How do you import Illustrate files into IsoDraw? So one of the publishing outputs of a figure in Illustrate is an ISO or a IsoDraw format. So you would publish that figure into the IsoDraw file, and then just open up that IsoDraw file into IsoDraw itself. I want to thank everyone for attending. I know we went over a little bit, but there was some great questions, and I hope you found Illustrate valuable. And let us know if you want to try it. Contact your TriStar sales representative. And I just want to thank you for your time today, taking a look at Creo Illustrate and some of the things that you can do with it. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.